The Suicide Squad, now just over a month away, will serve as the live-action debut for some really obscure DC villain characters. I mean, whoever thought we'd ever see Polka Dot Man in live action? It's gonna be crazy, and I'm really excited for this. And now, James Gunn has actually revealed a whole long list of other various DC villains that he once considered to be a part of this film. He had a whole folder when he first was approached with the idea of the Suicide Squad sequel of just a bunch of characters that he would have wanted to join Task Force X. And before we get into breaking that down, let's do a quick recap of course, the characters we know are going to be a part of this sequel / soft reboot film. So, of course, we got Amanda Waller, Harley Quinn, Bloodsport, Blackguard, Sorceria, Savant, Javelin, Captain Boomerang, Peacemaker, Weasel, TDK, aka the Detachable Kid, Mongal, Polka Dot Man, Ratcatcher 2, King Shark, Rick Flag, and The Thinker. So, I'm already super excited for this film. We got some crazy characters in this. I mean, like I said, whoever imagined we'd ever see Polka Dot Man in live action, or even like Weasel or Javelin. It's honestly kind of insane. And a lot of these characters are probably going to die pretty quickly in the film, but still, it's really awesome that we're actually going to be seeing these characters in live action in the DCU. It's going to be really crazy, but I'm so excited for it. But now, without further ado, let's jump into this list of characters that were almost in the Suicide Squad. Starting off with LiveWire, of course, a classic Superman villain. I feel like this would be awesome. I'm a huge fan of the LiveWire character, and especially since it doesn't look like we're really having a great future when it comes to Superman in the movies. I honestly would love to see a Superman versus LiveWire movie, but if that can't happen, I feel like she'd fit in pretty perfectly with the Suicide Squad. We've seen her in live action before. She was in Supergirl, and I believe she might have been on Smallville. I don't know for sure, but she was definitely in Supergirl. Wasn't really the greatest version of her, so I would have loved to have seen James Gunn's take on her, but I'm a huge fan of LiveWire, and I would have loved to have seen her. Maybe even a sequel. Then we have the characters of Punch and Julie, a very interesting duo. They kind of remind me of Joker and Harley Quinn, but not as cool. These two characters were actually in the animated Suicide Squad Hell to Pay movie that came out a couple years ago. Spoiler alert, they kind of died pretty quickly, but they were in there. And yeah, they definitely remind me of like a Joker Harley Quinn because they're both very like jester, theatrical themed characters. Julie is a very Harley Quinn-esque, doing flips and using yo-yos and all that stuff. So definitely would have made sense for this movie, but at the same time, I don't think they'd really be that useful on a mission, and I'm not really the biggest fan of them. So would have been cool, but at the same time, who cares? Then we have the Black Spider. This is another interesting character who we've also seen in a previous animated Suicide Squad movie. Actually, the first ever animated Suicide Squad movie, which actually wasn't even technically a Suicide Squad movie because it was actually called Batman Assault on Arkham, even though it was a Suicide Squad movie. But he was a pretty cool character in that. He didn't really do much in that movie. He was very similar to like a Deadshot type character, but I feel like there's a lot more that could be done with him, and I feel like it would have been really cool to see him in this movie. Then probably one that people would have loved to have seen is Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke. This would have been so awesome. He is a member of the Suicide Squad at times in the comics, and of course we already have Joe Manganiello in the role for the DCU, and everybody loves him in the role. Everybody wants to see more of him, especially after we've heard all these great things about his battle with Ben Affleck's Batman and what that movie would have been. I feel like he would have been awesome in the Suicide Squad, but the only thing is, I feel like I don't know if he actually would have fit, because this movie is going to be, you know, all these wacky, goofy, obscure characters that are kind of just going to be funny and stuff, and then this would have been like the super serious characters. I don't know if he would have exactly fit with this version of the squad, but again, still would have been cool, and I don't care how it happens. I just want to see Joe Manganiello back as Deathstroke once again, whether that's his own HBO Max series, his own movie, some sort of Batfleck thing, who knows, but we need him back because he's awesome. Then, a really interesting one that I was not expecting is the Man-Bat. Of course, another classic Batman villain who I've never thought about being on the Suicide Squad. I don't think he ever has been in the comics, but I think it might work. It might make sense because Dr. Kirk Langstrom, who becomes the Man-Bat, I feel like he'd be a pretty useful asset for the Suicide Squad, both as human form and as Man-Bat. I don't know. I think it would be really cool to see the character in live action, but I don't know if I'd really like him in the Suicide Squad. But I'd love to see him in one of the Batman sequels or just something like that. But I'd really like to see this character at some point in live action. Then we have the character of Plastique. This is a character I don't really know much about, but I think she's like another Superman villain maybe or something like that. But I feel like, she's another obscure character, so she probably would have fit in pretty well here with the Suicide Squad. Then we have Chemo, a really interesting character that, again, is not a character I would have expected to be part of the Suicide Squad, but at the same time makes so much sense. I grew up watching this character in Batman Unlimited, Mechs vs. Monsters, something like that. I don't remember the exact name of the movie, but it was a great movie. Loved it as a kid, and Chemo was one of the villains of it, and he's literally just this giant chemical blob, and I don't think he talks, but he just sprays out all this chemical poison stuff, and he's a pretty cool character, and I feel like he would work pretty well with the Suicide Squad because he is a villain, and he's got some pretty cool powers, and also I feel like if he dies, it'd be a pretty cool death, because like his outside shell that keeps all of those chemicals inside of him is kind of like if you pop it, it's kind of like a balloon, and like all the goo would just kind of like squirt out. I feel like that'd be a pretty cool death, but at the same time, he's a really cool character, and I loved him in that Batman Unlimited movie, so I'd love to see him in live action at some point. I feel like that'd be really cool. Then we have the character of KGBeast, another character we saw in Batman Assault on Arkham. This is a character that, again, would be very similar to Deadshot or Rick Flag or Bloodsport, along those lines, so would have fit in here, would have been cool. He's also got super strength, similar to Bane, so I feel like this would have been an interesting character and a nice addition to the Suicide Squad. Then, another one I was not expecting is Solomon Grundy, one of my favorite Batman villains, of course. Solomon Grundy, born on a Monday, that's kind of his whole thing, and another classic Batman villain. I really think this could have been cool because we've seen him in live action a couple times before, all the way back in the 70s with the Legends of the Superhero TV special, and then again in Gotham just a couple years ago, but I'd love to see him done on a movie level budget. And again, just like Man-Bat, I think I'd prefer to see him go up against Batman in one of the Batman future sequels or whatever they do with that. Don't care which Batman it is, I just want to see him go up against a Batman. I feel like that'd be cool, but also the Suicide Squad would have been awesome to see him a part of this as well. I feel like, again, it's another unexpected character, but I feel like he might have actually worked pretty well with the team. Then we have the Rainbow Creature. This is one that I don't think really makes sense because in the comics, it's literally just a rainbow creature. It's like this giant rainbow monster, so I don't know if he would have worked really well for this movie. Maybe as like a villain or just this giant mindless beast that the Suicide Squad has to fight, but not as an actual member of the squad. But still would have been cool and would have looked visually really awesome in live action, but I don't know, it could have been interesting. Then we have the character of Gunhawk, who is another obscure character I don't know much about, but based off his looks and the little research I did, again, he's another kind of Deadshot, Bloodsport, Rick Flag kind of character, so would have fit in, but we already got enough of those mercenaries, marksman kind of guys here, and I mean, he kind of got like the Cyclops visor going on, so I don't know, it would have been interesting, but again, we already got enough characters that are like that. Then we have the character of, let's see, what's her name here? Knockout. Yeah, her name is Knockout. She is actually one of the female Furies, or at least used to be. So she used to work with the New Gods, and she worked for Darkseid and all that stuff until she came to Earth and started working for Vandal Savage. So I feel like this would have been really cool, especially because we have another character that's actually in the movie with Mongal, who is another very similar character who came from space. She's of course like the daughter, maybe even sister of Mongal. So I feel like these two characters are very similar, so it was probably ending up between Mongal or Knockout, and James Gunn ended up choosing Mongal. Then another one that James Gunn has actually said that he will never do, and makes sense, and that is the Dog Welder. This is a really messed up character in the comics. I don't know much about him, but just from his name, you can tell he's a messed up character. I mean, he wears a bucket on his head, and he welds dogs. So, yeah, that's disgusting and wrong and so bad, and I'm glad this character's not in the movie, and I never want to see him in live action or even animation or literally anything at all. This sounds like a terrible character. Kite Man! Hell yeah! Oh yeah, this would have been awesome. Kite Man would have been an awesome character. We've never seen him in live action before, but he's kind of had a spark in popularity since his appearance in the Harley Quinn animated series, and he would have been such a funny character, especially if he's played out similar to how he is in the Harley Quinn series. I feel like this character would have been awesome in this movie. Or really any Suicide Squad movie. He definitely would have been one of the more comedic relief characters, and it's not necessarily like he's a cool villain either, like literally he just has a giant kite that he flies around on, but still would have been a hilarious character to include here. Then another one I was not expecting, another classic Batman villain, is Mr. Freeze, who again has never been in the Suicide Squad in the comics, but I feel like would have been an interesting character because this is a character that kind of reminds me of what we heard about Polka Dot Man in this movie. Because Polka Dot Man in this movie, he sounds like he's actually kind of suicidal and he actually wants to die. And that reminds me of Mr. Freeze because I don't know if I'd say he wants to die, but he doesn't really have anything left to live for. All the adaptations we've seen him in, his whole thing is that he's just doing crime so that he can get all this money to do all this research to save his wife Nora Freeze. But then like if she died, then it'll be like, all right, I have nothing left to live for. Let's go on this random suicide mission, and if I don't make it out of it, who cares? And also just seeing Mr. Freeze in live action would have been awesome. Of course, we got the Arnold Schwarzenegger version back in the 90s, and that was a thing. But we did get a pretty cool version of the character on Gotham, but I'd love to see this character done in a movie once again. I've even mentioned in videos in the past that a Mr. Freeze origin movie similar to Joker would be awesome because he's got such a tragic backstory, and I feel like he would have been awesome. And I feel like he would have been an unexpected, but also a character that makes sense to fit in with the Suicide Squad. Then speaking of Mr. Freeze, another icy cold character with Killer Frost, another classic member of the Suicide Squad. In the comics, this is one I would love to see, possibly in the next Suicide Squad film, whether that's done by James Gunn or not, but I'd love to see Killer Frost. She's such a cool character. Of course, we have her as one of the main characters on the Flash TV series, and you know, she started off cool there, but then she became more of a hero. But I want to see, like, the badass actual Killer Frost and like the full-on villain version of this character. So I feel like that would have been awesome. And she fits in so well with the Suicide Squad because her powers are literally so deadly, and I feel like she would have been awesome for this film. And I really hope that she's in the next Suicide Squad movie, whenever that is and whoever does it. So love to see her. Then we have the Sportsmaster, another one I would really love to see. We just recently got him in live action on the Stargirl TV series, and he was done so perfectly there. But I'd love to see him done in a movie, and the Suicide Squad I feel like is a perfect way to do that. And he's just such a cool character because again, he is kind of a similar to character like the Deadshot Bloodsport type character, but instead of using guns and weapons and like stuff like that, he used actual sports equipment. So you could have seen him use like a baseball bat and like a bowling ball and just all this random sports equipment, and I feel like that would have been another hilarious thing that would fit in with James Gunn's whole vibe of the Suicide Squad with just all this comedic stuff. And obviously somebody would have made a joke about it, like, hey, you want to use a gun, or you just gonna keep using that baseball bat? But yeah, anyway, that would have been awesome. I would have loved to seen Sportsmaster, but again, we have a great version on Stargirl, so I'm looking forward to seeing more of that version. But finally, we have Bat-Mite. This is one James Gunn has actually talked about a lot before, And this would have been so hilarious. Apparently, Bat-Mite was actually going to be the villain of the Suicide Squad film before he ended up coming on to Starro. And Bat-Mite would have been hilarious, especially if you're still going with this super crazy, goofy vibe for the Suicide Squad movie. Why not do Bat-Mite? He would have been such a crazy character. And if you don't know who Bat-Mite is, he's literally Batman's biggest fan. And he's a very similar to character to Mr. Mxyzptlk, where he's like this fifth dimensional imp, and he's got all these crazy magic powers. And I feel like if he was in this movie, he would actually be maybe even like an animated character, some kind of CGI. But like, I think it would make most sense if he was like a 3D animated character, but hanging out with all these live action people. That would have been hilarious, and everybody would have been making fun of him so much because it's like, oh, you got your tiny Batman costume and all that stuff. It would have been awesome, would have been so hilarious. But at the same time, I'm still really excited to see Starro, and who knows, maybe we will see Bat-Mite in live action / animation at some point in the future sometime soon, because that would be just so hilarious. But who knows what the future may hold. But Bat-Mite is an awesome, goofy, obscure character that I would love to see at some point. Maybe even the new Suicide Squad movie, whenever the third one is made, if it is made.